Freedom for me, but not for thee. That's the libertarian creed, at least according to their stance on reproductive rights. How do I know this? Well, there was a recent study that came out. Now, this study was written by Jocelyn Chalmers, a PhD student and associate lecturer at the University of Kent in Canterbury. And this, of course, study was published in Political Psychology. That study, the researchers found that libertarianism is associated with both opposition to women's rights to an abortion, but also support for men and their right to withdraw financial support for a child when a woman decides to have that child. So, okay, basically, let's break it down. Libertarians are saying, hey, look, if it affects me, then, no, I'm going to want it to go my way. It's my freedom over yours. Now, it actually makes sense considering how a lot of libertarians are cis white men and how a lot of them don't want to pay child support. Okay, so now the researchers, getting more into the data, found that those who describe themselves politically as libertarian were less likely to support a woman's right to have an abortion. To assess the support for abortion rights, researchers asked the participants whether they believed it should be possible for a pregnant woman to obtain a legal abortion under 7 different circumstances, such as if the family has a very low income and cannot afford any more children. They were more likely to agree with these statements, such as a woman should not be allowed to have an abortion if the man involved really wants to keep his unborn child, and if a child is born against the father's will, he should not be obligated to support the child financially. Again, if it's something that affects another person's bodily autonomy or their freedom, if I want something from them that affects them, then I should get it. That's my freedom. But if it's something that affects me and maybe it could infringe on what I think are my rights, well, then I'm not interested. It's my freedom to say no to that. But it's not your freedom to say no if you want an abortion. Oh, I see how that works. Now, the lack of straightforward application, illustrated by the findings, this is according to the study of the researchers, and that libertarian identification was associated with opposition to women's abortion rights and support for men's right both to prevent women from having abortions, otherwise known as the male veto, and to withdraw support financially for a child when women refuse to terminate the pregnancy, financial abortion. Now, the reason for this, they find, is not surprising. Their analysis suggested that hostile sexism, i.e., sexist antipathy, may account for this effect. Hostile sexism. People who scored high on measures of hostile sexism endorsed statements such as, when women lose to men in a fair competition, they typically complain about being discriminated against. That's what these libertarians believe. At least the majority of them polled. Now, interestingly enough, there was also something in there where a lot of, and we're talking about U.S. libertarians here, okay? They talked about something called benevolent sexism, which I think is a fascinating description here. That benevolent sexism portrays women as more moral and refined than men and entitled, but only if they properly adhered to their gendered role. And by the way, the only entitlement that they have is entitlement to men's protection. So now look, the whole thing seems a little weird when you look at the whole idea that's sold about libertarianism, which is to be freedom for everybody. Freedom for everybody to make their choices. But then weirdly enough, you see a lot of men who describe themselves as libertarians going, well, I'm against abortion, though. I'm very pro-life. Wait a minute, I thought you were for freedom. Yeah, but it's a baby. It's life, though. It's life, though. But you're curtailing someone else's freedom over bodily autonomy. Would you like that done to you? Oh, no, of course not. I believe in freedom. But I'm also a man. I have a penis, and so obviously we can't regulate that. But we can regulate uteruses, though. Wombs, because it's different. You see. Oh, okay. Well, that's how they do things. I see how that works. So now what's different here? Again, we're talking about U.S. libertarians. They pointed out that a lot of U.S. libertarians identify as Christian. So that might be why you do see a lot of that, patriarchal thinking, so to speak. Why you see, these attitudes on women and abortion and morality, talking about, the benevolent sexism part, where they're like, oh, women are moral and refined, but only if they're, playing their old gender roles, before the feminisms, before the wokeisms got to them and perverted them away from their old gender roles. They should be entitled to our protection. They were entitled to our protection. They just don't need us anymore. Interesting. Now, Chalmers and her colleagues observed a similar pattern of results when examining support for libertarian ideology. To assess support for libertarian ideology, the researchers asked participants the extent to which they agreed with statements such as, people who are successful in business have a right to enjoy their wealth as they see fit, and people should be free to decide what groups of norms or traditions they themselves want to follow. In some, they said, libertarians supported men's autonomy and tended to oppose women's, particularly when it conflicted with men's, i.e. freedom for me, but not for thee. And there was evidence that this may have been because they tended to have hostile attitudes towards women. Shocker. Yes, turns out a lot of libertarian men, and again, a lot of them are men, are like, well, I like freedom and all, but not for the women folks. And they should be doing what I want, because my freedom is to tell you what to do. I get to do whatever I want, but you can't. Well, that's not what freedom means. They don't get it. Now, there are limitations in the study. As I keep mentioning, this looked at United States, right? Because libertarianism means different things in different places, right? But here we're looking at the people that are, like Rand Paul or Ron Paul, Ayn Rand, those kind of people, right? So we're not talking about like libertarian socialists, which is a different thing. Okay. Basically, the kind of people that subscribe to this are essentially Republicans, but like smoking weed and occasionally speak out against war. That's essentially what it is. So look, all in all, I don't think we should all be surprised by this study to see libertarian men being sexist, believing in those old gender roles, and the fact that they, put their freedom over everyone else's, impinging on it when it suits them. It fits their whole idea of being incredibly selfish. Because again, going back to Ayn Rand, her whole belief is righteous selfishness. And being selfish is the biggest virtue. And of course, part of being selfish is not caring about other people's rights and other people's freedoms.